Where are we?
We are in
Leviticus
we're going to get
3.
started. We're in Leviticus chapter 3.
They'll put me to sleep up.
Or was he doing Frankenstein?
No, Jonathan is doing Frankenstein.
Yeah, that's what I meant. He's in the back and he has headphones on, but I wasn't sure.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we are in Leviticus chapter 3. If you'll recall, in chapter 1 and chapter 2, we dealt with the burnt offering, which was one of the offerings for sin, one of the offerings for atonement. In chapter 3, we're going to deal with the peace offering. Okay, and this is a little different. So we need to make sure we understand that. So in chapter 3 begins, if his offering is a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offers an animal from the herd, he can offer male or female. Okay, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. Okay, so this is important. This offering is not about sin.
No, it's for fellowship.
It's for fellowship. It's for, I want peace with the Lord. Okay.
Got you.
And so in this case, the male restriction does not apply.
Okay.
Okay. So male or female, but it still has to be without blemish. Okay.
The cream of the crop.
Right. So he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering and kill it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Okay. Now remember, this is cow. Okay. Because it's from the herd.
Yeah.
Okay. And then an Aaron's son, the priest, shall throw the blood against the sides of the altar. And from the sacrifice of the peace offering as a food offering to the Lord, he shall offer the fat covering the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails. So basically what it means is they will kill it. And then in this case, they will butcher it. And they will open it up and they will pull all the internal organs out.
Do they wash them still?
Well,
It doesn't
in this
say.
case, it is not, they don't, there's some of it they don't use.
Oh.
Okay, so they take the fat off of all the entrails.
Oh.
And then they
okay.
take the 2 kidneys. Okay, so and from the sacrifice,
Two
the fat
kidneys.
covering the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails. And the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them at the loins.
And that's like your upper, that's like the upper thigh.
Well, kidneys. Think
Kidneys are
about their,
back here.
yeah, but they're in the back, the loin.
Oh,
the-
okay.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay. The 2 kidneys, the fat that in them, the long lobe of the liver. Okay, that he shall remove with the kidneys. Okay. And then Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar on top of the burnt offering, which is on the wood of the fire. It is a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So the peace offering is brought with another offering. So you do a burnt offering and a peace offering. The burnt offering is completely burned.
That's the burnt sin offering.
Right. The
And the
peace
peace
offering
offering
is
is
only only the liver, the kidneys, and the fat on all the entrails. Okay. Then it says, if his offering for sacrifice of a peace offering is from the flock, once again, male or female,
Without blemish.
so he can choose. Okay.
I
He
got
shall,
too many females. Let's take
Right.
some of these.
Okay.
Gotcha.
If he offers a lamb for his offering, he shall offer it before the Lord. He lays his hand on his offering, kills it in front of the tent of meeting. And then Aaron's sons shall throw its blood against the side of the altar. And then once again, the fat that covers the entrails and the fat that is on the entrails, the kidneys and their fat at the loins, and the long lobe of the livery, he shall remove with the kidneys. And the priest shall burn it on the altar as a food offering before the Lord.
The
Okay.
fat of the tail, like just like the tail, like they lop off
The fat of.
of it. What
So
if there's-
think about the idea that,
This is the entire back tail.
right. Okay. So just think about the tail, like everything else, is fat and muscle.
Yeah, wait,
So they take the fat.
are sheep born with tails?
Yes. Not very long, but
I didn't know that. See, I thought they were born without tails.
well, they have a small tail.
Okay,
Okay.
like a bobtail.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So the priest shall burn it on the altar as a food offering to the Lord. Okay. So this is a little different. Now, notice what has not happened in both of these cases.
None of the meat.
The meat has not been offered.
No, none of the meat has.
Okay. So here's the interesting part of this, and we'll get into this a little more later. They can then take the rest of it and use it for a meal. Although there is a section of these offerings that are given to the priests for their food.
This is not.
This is not a sin offering. It doesn't mention that yet here.
Okay, because I was assuming
So,
that's what they did with the rest of it was.
If his offering is a goat, then he shall offer it before the Lord, lay his hand on its head, kill it in front of the tent of meeting. Once again, same thing. The sons of Aaron shall throw its blood against the sides of the altar. Then he shall offer from it as his offering for a food offering to the Lord, the fat covering the entrails, the fat that is on the entrails, the 2 kidneys with their fat at the loins, and the long lobe of the liver he shall remove with the kidneys. Priest burns them at the altar with a food as a food offering with a pleasing aroma. All fat is the Lord's. Okay. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwelling places, that you eat neither fat nor blood. Now understand, this is what it
would be so screwed now.
but think about, and so let's deal with it this way. Okay. So when you cook, and I'm going to use this because I do it. When you cook a brisket, there is a cap of fat.
Yeah, I've seen
Okay.
it.
Now there is other fat that is inside the meat. It's called intermuscular fat. That they don't have to make sure they get all that off. What they have to do is they have to trim
That big thick.
the big thick layer of fat off,
Got you.
and it belongs to the Lord in this situation.
Okay.
Okay.
So like if, like in modern times, if you were gonna give them a brisket, you would have to cut off
Yes.
the fat.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you supposed to cut off the fat when you cook that stuff anyways?
No, not necessarily. You cook off some of it. Some of it isn't really edible. But that is part of this discussion, is that they were not to eat extremely fatty cuts of meat.
They were probably very lean people.
Okay. So then when we go to the next section in chapter 4, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people of Israel saying, if anyone sins unintentionally in any of the Lord's commandments about things not to be done and does any of them, if it is the appointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on the people, then he shall offer for the sin that he has committed. So now what? This is a very clear discussion. This particular offering is the priest sins.
So if like Aaron said, oh, well, I want to keep a little.
Or one of the kids.
Or one
Well,
of the
or
kids,
anything.
or anything.
Okay. So, but
any slaughter.
understand, the priest is just as human as everyone else.
Yes.
Okay. So he does something he's not supposed to do.
Yeah.
Then he shall offer for the sins he's committed a bull from the herd without blemish to the Lord for a sin offering. Now let's make sure we understand. As the priest, he pays a higher price.
Which is why he has to do the bull.
He doesn't have the option of a sheep or a goat.
He just has to do
It has to be a bull.
Because he's held to a higher standard.
Because he's held to a higher standard. Now, there's another element here. Okay. This is something that is very, very important in this idea. Our priest is supposed to be the one who stands between us and God. Okay. So in order to truly do his job, he needs to be in right standing before God.
Right.
However, in Leviticus, we have a plan and purpose for what to do should he fail to live up to
The standards.
standard that God had. Now, here's the point. If even the priest could not live up to the standard, no one could.
Yeah, I'm thinking those are
Okay.
pretty high standards.
So this is one place, but there is another. When it talks about the Day of Atonement, okay, specifically, and we'll get to it quite a bit later, but when we talk about the Day of Atonement, one of the things that it brings up in a very, very real way is that before the high priest can offer the sacrifice for the people, he has to offer a sacrifice for
For
himself,
to make sure he's in the right standard.
because to make sure he is not in sin. Okay, prior or as he is acting as mediator between God and the people.
Gotcha.
Now, in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Hebrews, it makes a very clear distinction to say that unlike the priests of Aaron, Jesus does not have to offer a sacrifice for his own sin
Because he had.
before he offers a sacrifice for the people. Okay, now you're right, because he had no sin. But understand that he could not have been the atonement made by these priests was not enough to forgive all sin. It was just enough to cover.
The sins.
Okay, so that's where Hebrews comes in with this idea that Jesus is the bringer of a better sacrifice. He's a better high priest. He's a better high priest because he didn't have to offer a sacrifice for himself. He's a better high priest because he is perfect. He was God, just as he was man. Okay. And his sacrifice was better because it could forgive sin, not just cover over it.
So I got a question,
Okay.
because I just heard you say something about Jesus. Jesus never offered any sacrifices, did he? It doesn't tell us about him sacrificing
One,
himself. Yeah, but other than that.
Okay. But that's the whole point.
Okay.
Jesus is the Passover lamb. He is the perfect. Remember
But
that
his family would have growing up and all. He would have grown up with that, right?
Yes. Okay. But remember that, and remember how it's phrased. Early in the book of John, John the Baptist tells two of his disciples, "Behold, the Lamb of God."
Yes.
Okay.
Seen him walking by
So,
and called him that.
Now, understand there are a couple of very important elements that we get into earlier in the Old Testament that bring up to this. Okay. Remember that when Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac, okay, God
Yes.
tells him, "Go and sacrifice your son." So he takes his son, who, by the way, is probably a young teenager. Okay, not a baby.
Not a baby.
He brings Isaac to the place of sacrifice, and Isaac goes, "Okay, I see the wood. I see the stuff to put the fire on. I see the, all of that, but there's no sacrifice. Where's the lamb? Where's the sacrifice?" And he goes, "Well, God will provide." Okay. And so Abraham is just about to kill his own son when an angel goes, "Stop." And suddenly they hear a noise, and Abraham looks over, and there is a male goat or a male
Ram.
sheep stuck in the brambles nearby, stuck in the thorns.
Like the mesquite bush.
Uh-huh. And so that is God's provided sacrifice in Isaac's place. It is God's provided lamb, or ram in this case. But for Jesus, Jesus is the provided lamb of the sacrifice.
Gotcha.
So when we tried to provide sacrifices, they were never enough. But when God provides the sacrifice, it is enough. Hi, Punky. I'm glad you're here.
Sorry,
No, you're
Oh,
fine.
you're fine.
it's been a long day.
I'm sure. Okay. So that is a very important element of this.
Okay.
Okay. Is that one of the reasons he's a better high priest is because he doesn't have to, he never had to do this.
Yeah, and these priests have to go inside the tent and everything
Uh-huh.
with the blood,
Okay.
which they don't have to do for the people. Why do they have to do it for them and not for the people?
Oh, no, they have to do it for the people
They have
too.
to go inside the tent? and
So
sprinkle
once
it?
a year.
Okay, once a year.
Okay. Once a year when they do the sacrifice for the, now notice, because there's a little bit of a difference here. The burnt offering at the beginning of this is a burnt offering for individual people.
Yeah,
At the Day of Atonement, they are making a sacrifice for the national sin of Israel.
gotcha.
And that offering they do take into the, they
Into the
take
tent
into the tent.
and sprinkle it.
Uh-huh. Okay. So that's important. Okay.
So what is a national?
So in other words, it is a, so one of the best ways to describe it is this: it is the culmination of all the individual sin. Okay. So anything, in some ways, it's anything they missed. But there are certainly places where, as a nation, they would have been disobedient to God. Okay. So even think about our nation now. There are things on a national level where we are disobedient to the Lord.
Amen.
That no specific, it's no specific individual, it's a national level.
Yeah,
But it is also an idea of the culmination of all the individual sin of the year. Then on the Day of Atonement, they would go in and offer a sacrifice for
the whole.
the nation and all of their sins. Now, there's still, the individual ones were important because that was personal atonement. But the truth is, on a national level, they still needed atonement. And so the Day of Atonement was a day where that was what was offered, was an animal for the national atonement of Israel. Now, there are a couple of very real things we'll get into later. There's actually the idea of both the slaughter of the animal for the Day of Atonement, and there's also the discussion of the scapegoat. Okay. Now,
I was the scapegoat.
Okay. well, so let's deal with that for just a second. We'll get to it really later, but let's deal with it for just a minute.
Like there's legit.
So what is the term scapegoat mean?
Yes.
To be blamed for everything.
Okay. So that is exactly what this is. They would take two lambs. They would take two sheep, and one they would kill, and the other one they would lay their hands on it, and they would in part put all the sin of the people on this goat and then send it out into the wilderness.
They didn't sacrifice it.
No, they would run it off from the camp.
Poor little thing. How's it gonna live by itself?
It's not.
But that's the idea.
Oh, take all our sins and go be
And
free.
go, yeah, and get away from us.
Okay.
Okay, so watch, but understand, this is a discussion for the people of how seriously God takes sin.
Take it.
Remember in the New Testament that Jesus, when he's talking about the Sermon on the Mount, what does he say? He says, if your eye causes you to fall away from God, pluck it out, because it's better for you to go to heaven with one eye than go to hell with two eyes. And if your hand causes you to fall away, cut your hand off, because it's better for you to go to heaven with one hand. So what does that say? God takes it pretty serious.
Yeah.
There's no halfway. And that's part of this. Okay.
Measures availed us
So-
nothing.
Back to chapter 4. If it is the anointed priest who sins, thus bringing guilt on the people. Now, that tells you something about this higher standard. Because what did it just say? If it is the priest who sins, he brings sin on everybody.
Everybody. You don't want a corrupt priest up there because then-
That's correct.
then you're getting like a whole lot of.
Uh-huh.
Think about, but it happens so much later in Israel's history as well, with the judges and the kings and everything else. If it's a good one,
They prosper.
yes.
Mhm.
If it
it's
is not,
They
mhm.
do not.
And that's that connection to the nationality and how that can be
And by the
led
way,
so easily astray.
It's the same with America. Like
Yes,
when
it
we have a
is.
good leader, we are
Prosperous.
prosperous. And when we don't, we are not. Look
But-
at where we're at right
Right
now.
now.
but
Yeah.
look at how the Bible deals with kings in the Bible. Whenever it goes in and gives a detailed discussion of a king, you can guarantee, and it happens every single time, a king is only as good as the people he listens to. Okay. So,
And if he has bad people around him, it's gonna be a bad. king.
so the Pharaoh for Joseph, he listened to Joseph's advice and gave Joseph authority to work the plan that Joseph had come up with God.
Yeah.
He had a good advisor and he prospered. Then later in the time of Moses, Pharaoh wouldn't listen
To Moses. And-
to Moses and even to some of his own advisors who said, just let him go.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. When you look at David, when you look at Nebuchadnezzar, when you look at all these kings throughout the entire Old Testament, you will find that the biggest mistakes kings make is when they listen to the wrong person. It's just, and it is something that seems to be all over the Old Testament.
It's even true of large churches.
Mhm.
Well, and I mean, small churches too, to be honest. If the pastor has a wife who's not into ministry or whatever, it's just not, it's,
Or a
That's
pastor who
real.
listens to the wrong people in the church.
Yeah.
Probably the best example of it in the entire Old Testament is the story of Rehoboam. So Solomon is David's son. He's the second king over Israel. He's the third king over Israel.
David, that's
So-
yep.
Right.
Okay.
So he starts off really well and then just kind of falls apart. And because it falls apart and his falling apart all had to do with women.
Every
Go
time.
figure.
Women and
Always
horses,
the same
actually.
problem, too.
Women
Yeah.
and horses.
Horses. I forgot about the
Okay.
horses.
Horses.
But yes, so the
Like
Old
it's
Testament,
like actual horses.
when we
It's
get
not
to
a-
Deuteronomy,
Horses.
no,
No.
when we get to Deuteronomy, it will say that a king of Israel is not to bring to himself many wives and many horses.
Oh, and that's why, because,
He did both.
okay,
Okay.
because it makes them loopy.
And-
Apparently.
So the horses and chariots are a sign of secular power in the Bible. So you are not relying on God, you're relying on your
On yourself.
military.
Gotcha.
Many wives, and this is absolutely what it says. If a king brings for himself many wives, then they will lead him astray.
Well, that just makes sense in
Right.
life, period.
Right. I'm like, it's so obvious.
Okay. So God determines that because Solomon has not been faithful, that he's going to still keep his promise to David, and he's going to leave Solomon's ancestors or descendants 2 of the 12 tribes, Judah and Benjamin.
Okay.
Okay. But the rest of the tribes are going to be taken away because of Solomon's disobedience.
And that's when they go to Babylon, right?
No, well, this is long before that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Solomon's son is named Rehoboam. Okay. And God has called a guy named Jeroboam
Yeah.
to take over the northern tribes. Okay. So they all go to Rehoboam and they say, look, we loved your dad, but the taxes and all of that were way too high. It was oppressive, and it was. Now they had a huge, they prospered through Solomon's reign, but he expected them to pay a large share. Okay. And so he says, look, if you will lighten the load on us, then we will follow you. And Rehoboam goes back to his advisors, and the older advisors say, yes, that's a really good idea. Solomon really was pretty rough. The taxes were high. He had high expectations of the people, and we will be just fine if you lighten the load.
And Rehoboam is the one that sleeps with his dad?
No, that's one of David's sons. That's another one of David's sons who sleeps with his dad's concubines.
Okay.
That's Absalom.
Thank you.
Okay. So Rehoboam is David's grandson.
Okay.
Okay. So the older advisors say, yes, that's what you need to do. You need to lighten the load. His buddies, who are the same age as him, go, oh no, what you need to do is you need to show them who's boss. And so literally he says, okay, that he comes back to the people, he listens to his buddies, and he comes back to the people and says, you think my father was heavy? The weight of my father's arm will be like the weight of my thumb. He goes, I'm going to be way worse than my dad. And so 10 of the tribes depart. Okay.
Well, that makes
So watch.
sense.
If he had listened to the right people,
The older advisors that said, yes, this
now
is a good idea.
what do we know? God had already planned that out and knew exactly who he was going to listen to. But we still need to understand that a leader is only as good as the people that he takes advice from.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, we come back to this discussion of sacrifice. And this time it's the priest who has sinned. So there's a higher level of guilt here. So he shall offer for the sin that he has committed a bull from the herd without blemish to the Lord as a sin offering. Chapter 4, verse 3. Okay. So he does not get the option of a lesser sacrifice. He does not get to bring a sheep or a goat.
You gotta pay full price for a mission here.
Okay. So he brings the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord. He lays his hand on the head of the bull and kills the bull before the Lord. The anointed priest shall take some of the blood of the bull and bring it into the tent of meeting. And the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle part of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense before the Lord that is in the tent of meeting. Okay, so now here's the fun part of this. The priest has been guilty of sin. You could make a case, and it's not specific, but certainly this is part of the discussion. He cannot enter the tent of meeting without the blood.
Oh, okay, got you.
The blood allows the blood of this animal allows him entrance.
Into the main.
Right. And then he goes up right to the curtain in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and he sprinkles blood there as payment for his sin. And then he puts blood on the horns of the altar of incense where the prayers and worship to God go up.
Gotcha.
And then the rest of the blood, other than what he has already used, okay, he comes out and goes to the burnt offering altar and he pours out the remaining of the blood
Base.
at the base of the altar of, okay,
The sin altar.
right. Okay. And all the fat of the bull, okay, of the sin offering, he shall remove from it the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is on the entrails and the kidney and the fat that is on them and the loins and the lobe of the liver. He shall remove with the kidneys, just as these are taken from the ox of the sacrifice of the peace offering. He will burn them on the altar, okay, of burnt offering. But the rest of the bull, okay, so everything that is not offered, he takes outside of the camp to a place that is ceremonially clean. So it can't be a place that is unclean, but he takes it to a clean place outside of the camp and he burns everything else.
Oh, I was thinking that he got to eat some of it. And I'm thinking, man, every time he won beef, he'd just be like, oh,
Okay.
I sinned. We got beef tonight.
No. Every
That's
so
good thinking.
so let's make sure we
It's
understand
like
this.
God was already thinking about somebody doing that. No, here's
that's how
this.
you get to work.
Sin offerings,
Don't eat
none.
them.
Certainly the person who sins doesn't get anything out of it.
Gotcha.
Okay, so now it tells us it's outside to a clean place, to the place where all the ashes of all the other sin offerings, and then he burns it there.
He doesn't even burn it on the altar. He burns
No.
it there. Gotcha.
Okay. So then it goes on. If the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly. Okay, so now here's what it means. Okay, so let's say, and maybe one of the best discussions of this may be the story of Achan. Okay, or really several times we have this discussion. The children of Israel decide to do something that God doesn't like, so they've sinned. Okay, but they don't realize they've sinned, and that's the idea here. They didn't do it on purpose, and they don't realize that they've done it.
Gotcha.
Okay, they do any of the things that the Lord's commandments say ought not to be done, and they realize their guilt. So they didn't know, and 3 weeks later they go, "Oh my gosh, we shouldn't have done that."
I think I've been there.
Right.
Okay,
You
I
walk
pray
into
for forgiveness
you walk
of sins
into-
I don't even realize yet.
you walk into the chapel you walk to the chapel or whatever
Mhm.
for service, and then you just hear someone in like the back of the room go, "Oh my gosh, you shouldn't have done that."
uh-huh. That's part of this idea.
Basically, it.
When the sin that they have committed becomes known, okay, the assembly shall offer a bull from the herd for a sin offering and bring it in front of the tent of the meeting, and the elders of the congregation. So this time we are talking about, now notice, national sin.
Yes.
Was not
The
one
group.
individual, it was the group.
Where does this bull come
From the people.
From
It
somebody.
doesn't say exactly who offers the bull, but somebody offers the bull. Okay.
No, I didn't even think about that, but yeah. Like,
Mhm.
is there a simple herd
They
or?
probably like
Mhm.
take turns, like here, draw straws, or
Mhm.
this is your month, or this is your
Right.
Or
turn.
it more
Or
it
you
more
Okay.
signed
be
up to be an elder.
or it more
so-
be draw
Right.
2x4.
Okay.
So
Huh,
this
I didn't
time,
even think about that.
the elders of the
'Cause that's for a
congregation.
sacrifice for
So-
whoever.
Now, this is an interesting discussion because at the time of Moses, there were 70 elders.
Holy moly. that's
So
a
you have
lot.
this group around this cow.
Of sitting before it comes, or 69 before it comes back to you.
Okay,
Right?
so we don't know for sure how all that works, but the idea is the elders of the congregation, maybe not all of them, but they probably have a way of determining which ones, lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord, and then it's killed. Then the anointed priest shall bring some of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting. The priest dips his finger in the blood, sprinkles it 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil. And he'll put some of the blood on the horns of the altar that is in the tent of meeting before the Lord. And the rest of the blood he'll pour at the base of the altar of burnt offering that is in the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all its fat he shall take from it and burn on the altar. Thus he shall do with the bull. as he did with the bull of the sin offering, so shall he do with this. And the priest shall make atonement for them, and they shall be forgiven. And then he shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it up as he burned the first bull. It is the sin offering for the assembly. Now,
So the
this-
priest and the assembly gotta take the bull outside the camp to the
Okay.
clean spot to burn.
So, by the way, understand that while we are dealing with this in the course of just a situation of the priest sinning or just a situation of the assembly sinning,
Yeah,
this is the process that comes later when we talk about the Day of Atonement.
okay.
Okay. Now, think about the fact of, and we talked about the idea of higher standard. If the priest sins, he has to do the same thing that if all the rest of the people sin.
Well, because his sin affects all the rest of the people.
Okay.
That would make sense.
So then it goes on. When a leader sins. So if it's not a national sin, but it's one of the elders or one of the leaders. Okay. Sins doing unintentionally any of the things that by the commandment of the Lord ought not to be done. And once again, watch, he didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't an intentional action, but he realizes either as he's doing it or after he's done it that he's guilty of it, or the sin which he has committed is made known to him. So maybe he didn't know, and one of his neighbors go, well, you weren't supposed to.
Like
Maybe
working
he
on
had a
the-
cheeseburger and somebody comes up later and goes, you know, you're not supposed to have cheese and meat in the same meal. When he realizes his guilt,
Darn it. you're
Okay.
right, I
Okay.
wasn't
Sad
supposed to
day.
do that. Sad
he
day.
shall bring a male goat, a male without blemish. He lays his hands on the head of the goat, kills it in the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord, because it is a sin offering. Then the priest takes some of the blood of the sin offering and puts it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and pour the rest of its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. All its fat he shall burn on the altar like the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin, and he shall be forgiven.
So, real quick.
Yes.
question. Or real quick thing I just wanted to mention. So with the edition that I'm using with says the English Standard Version, but I'm not quite sure. Then the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar.
Yes.
Does yours say that?
Because I'm using the same version you are.
Okay.
And
So it is correct.
yeah,
And
yeah,
also
it was,
says that too.
yeah,
He dips his finger in the blood and
rubs it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Like finger painting.
Yeah,
We're gonna
yeah, I
finger paint
know.
with lead.
I know.
that's okay.
okay. So
I just thought that specification was.
Just gonna play in the.
Right.
So it's very specific, but it's supposed to be.
Yeah,
yeah, it's supposed to be specific.
because they could have used a hyssop branch instead of
Right.
their finger, but he's specific and says, use your finger.
Okay.
I don't know
So-
what the difference would be, but I'm sure there is one.
There
Right.
is one.
I know.
What
but I
God
don't know.
commanded.
Not-
That's
not-
really the only difference.
It's not commanded. There you go. You just sinned because you didn't follow directions.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That would-
So if any one of the common people sins unintentionally in doing any one of the things which the Lord commands, and he realizes his guilt or the sin which he's committed and made known to him, he shall bring for his offering a goat, a female without blemish, for his sin which he has committed. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill the sin offering in the place of the burnt offerings. And the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour out all the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall remove as the fat is removed from the peace offerings. And the priest shall burn it on the altar for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be forgiven.
What would the aroma of burning fat be?
Oh, good cooking.
Yeah.
I don't know, I
Brisket.
love-
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Sorry.
Good. That's
Sorry,
why it's a pleasing aroma.
It's more valuable than a
pleasing aroma. I know.
Well, it would be
God coveted.
because you would have, so
It's like,
this is my understanding of it. So just like in cattle, you have a large number of female animals and one male animal that is responsible for. Okay. And remember what it seems to be, at least for the sin offerings, it can't be a castrated male animal. It has to be an actual bull or a male goat that can reproduce.
Bulls are more valuable than the females.
Right, because you have more female. Now, not to say the females aren't valuable, but they are not as valuable as the bull because the bull is responsible for all the females.
The last sin we talked about it.
It would, the sacrifice is less costly to the person. Okay. And so, but once again, it's the same kind of thing. Now, if it's the entire congregation or if it's the priest, then notice the blood is put on the altar inside the tent of meeting. And for these individuals outside of the priesthood, it's on the altar of burnt offerings outside of the tent.
Outside of that, they don't take.
Okay. So, but at the same time, we still have this idea of the burning. Her call she got disconnected. So there is an element to this where we have to understand there are some similarities which each of these. Okay. Yeah, it is on purpose.
Sure.
No. Never mind.
Oh,
Okay. You're ready to go.
Oh,
okay. So once again, in each of these things, the priest makes atonement for him for the sin which he has committed, and he shall be forgiven. Okay. Now, this is important. Okay. Because what it tells us, in addition to the fact of what goes on with the priest, and we talked about the higher standard, and we talked about why that makes Jesus a better high priest, because he never has to sacrifice for himself. But remember that Jesus is called our high priest. So what is his job as high priest? It is to make atonement for our sins. That is a incredibly
It's a case to God.
right, and pays the cost for our sins. Okay. No, it's okay. We are not going to start chapter 5. We're going to stop there. That way we're not stopping in the middle of a chapter. The beginning of chapter 5. So we're going to finish there with the sin offerings. We will pick up next time with the discussions of
Chapter 5.
right. And by the way, in chapter 5, we're going to talk about what happens if you lie under oath, or if you I mean, that's part of this discussion. Okay.
I think I've done that.
Right. Or if he touches, now some of this is more along the lines of he's called to testify and doesn't, or if he touches
Oh.
something he's not supposed to, or so they're kind of civil matters. Okay. And so we'll pick up there. And then we'll go through probably chapter 5 and chapter 6, depending on how quickly we get through it. Okay, so we're going to stop right there. You're welcome, Letitia. We'll see you later. Thank you guys for all being a part of this, and have a wonderful night.